Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Exit to Excel. I'm Latanya, also known as LT, and this is where we turn career setbacks into the three T's with truth, tools, and transformation. Before we even get started with today's episode, I just have to extend a huge thank you for the incredible response to our first episode last week. The downloads, the shares, the saves, the messages, even talking to my neighbors, you all just blew me away. And what's clear to me now more than ever is that people are hungry for real, unfiltered career advice, and I am here for it. Now, if you missed episode 1, where we covered the F48 framework, those first critical 48 hours after you're notified of a layoff, go back and listen. Because today we're going to talk about what happens before it even gets to that point. We are going to go behind the curtain, behind the closed doors where those discussions are taking place, and before you are informed that your services are no longer needed. But before we dig in, let's check in with our Ask LT segment. Now, you recall last week I mentioned that the Ask LT segment is the portion where you can come to me as your HRSW, your HR secret weapon, to ask any questions that you want and the ones that HR probably won't answer for you. And no appointment is needed. All you need to do is send me a note on Instagram, hashtag AskLT on my Exit to Excel Instagram page or on TikTok and ask your question. For things that are more sensitive in nature, if you want to maintain your anonymity, then send me a DM. You can also send me an email to exittoexcel@gmail.com. But first, one question I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to mention some other questions later on in the segment because I think it'll tie in very well with what we're talking about, is the termination and how it occurred. Someone said that they were called into a room. They were pretty much told that their job was no longer available. It was being eliminated. And they were given 2 hours to collect their things and get out the building. And they wanted to know if that was legal. Well, unfortunately, it is. But it's the other things that took place maybe beforehand that you might want to take a look at to determine the legality of the actions. Now, that being said, let me just say this. The way that some of these terminations are being handled, particularly in the federal government, is deplorable. And no one deserves to be treated like that. So just know that in the event that your layoff or termination did not treat you with the respect and dignity that you deserve, it is not a reflection on you at all. It is more a reflection of the organization. And I wouldn't even blame your manager, because a lot of times the manager is deferring to HR and senior management in terms of how these things are going to be executed. And it is up to them to provide them with the proper tools and resources and support. And that doesn't always happen. So again, even though some of these things are not taking place the way that they should, it doesn't mean that they're not legal, and it definitely doesn't speak to your value or your contributions or your achievements in that particular role. But I thought that was a very good question. So keep those questions coming. This is exactly what Ask LT is for, is to get the real answers to the questions that may be keeping you up at night. Now, for today's episode, we're talking about the writing on the wall, the signs and signals, and the layoff conversation. So I'm going to tell you what happens in the months and weeks prior to you being called into a meeting with your manager to hear those dreaded words. So today I'm going to share with you 5 things. First is the real timeline on how layoffs are planned. You might be surprised to hear that some of these, planning sessions are taking place 4 to 6 months before the action takes place. Some of them may be only 4 weeks. So we're going to talk about the timelines. Secondly, I'm going to share with you the warning signs that are actually reliable versus the false alarms. And we'll talk about those. Thirdly, we're going to talk about what managers and HR, what we're each actually thinking during those conversations and things that we want to say and the things we're told not to say. I'm going to share with you some personal stories. I actually have stories from when I was completely caught off guard and how I learned the lesson from that, not to be ever caught off guard again. And I'm going to share those things with you as well. And then finally, we'll also talk about the difference between mass layoffs and individual terminations and why it matters. We're also going to discuss how to use that F48 framework, not just after you've been laid off, but particularly while you're still working, because preparation is key when you start seeing the signs. Because here's the thing, knowledge is power. And the more you understand how this process works, the better you can prepare yourself and protect yourself and your career. So let me tell you how layoffs occur and something that might surprise you. Most layoffs are not knee-jerk reactions. For the most part, they aren't. But honestly, the way some of this nonsense has been going on, I might have to I might have to reconsider that. But for the most part, they are not knee-jerk reactions. They're not decisions that are made on a Tuesday or Wednesday to execute that Thursday or Friday. The planning process typically starts anywhere from 90 to 120 days prior, and sometimes even earlier, depending on the organization that you're in. So, what is really happening those months before you hear anything? Okay, I'm going to break it down for you. We're going to talk about the planning timeline from the boardroom to your manager's office or your own office, depending on where the meeting is taking place. So, 4 to 6 months out is the executive decision. That is where it starts. It's in the boardroom with your C-suite executives, your senior vice presidents, your executive vice presidents, your presidents, looking at the financial projections, market conditions, budget forecast, and the reasons for the layoffs usually comes from economic downturns, restructuring, or even changes in corporate strategy. The decision to explore layoffs really, guys, it really is a last resort because, as you can imagine, these are extremely disruptive to the business. When these actions start taking place, of course, it causes fear in people who are still working, wondering and waiting and anticipating if they're going to be next. So it is the last lever a company wants to pull whenever they have to make these decisions and they aren't taken lightly. Now, what are they discussing in these boardrooms and behind the curtain? They're discussing how much money they need to save, which departments that need to be considered, particularly your, overhead functions like HR, finance, legal, because we aren't generating any money. And so they'll want to take a very close look at all the departments to determine where they can cut. Sometimes they'll bring in management consultants to look at their organizational efficiency to see, hey, where can we afford to cut? So if you see these consultants walking around your organization with clipboards or tablets, taking, notes, copious notes, that usually isn't a good sign. Now, but who's really making the decisions? The decisions are driven by metrics, right? And your manager's opinion of you, I hate to let you know, holds very little weight. I don't care how much they like you because when they are told, usually by their manager, who has been told by their manager, and sometimes their manager, that they have to cut so much money from their budget and or so many heads from their head count, the relationship that you have with them matters very little. And oftentimes they cannot save you unless they have, really good, strong documentation. And so that's why, it's very important to keep things in perspective because the decisions that are usually made about your future in a company are usually made by people who don't even know you personally. They're made by the financial people, consultants, and senior leadership who are looking at spreadsheets and not faces. They're analyzing the cost per employee, department profitability, and return on the investment, not your personality or your potential. So again, that's why it's important to, keep things in perspective and stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Now, once they have made the decision that they have to reduce headcount and everyone has gotten their charge, this is when it gets serious. This is when HR will typically start working with leaders to look at their organization to determine where they can cut, right? We'll look at what work is being done, what work can be reduced, what work can be eliminated, what work can be shifted. We're working with them on all of that. And then eventually you get down to the people, actual faces, actual names. And we will outline, who those people are and identify them and come up with a solid plan to then review with legal. So HR, sometimes it's done with HR and the manager to work with the employment attorneys to make sure that we're compliant. And this assessment includes an assessment of any WARN Act triggering or coverage events, preparation of WARN compliant notices, and design of statistical adverse impact analyses. Now, let me explain the adverse impact analysis. And I've mentioned this I think in one of my reels. It's basically a statistical study to make sure that the layoffs are not disproportionately affecting protected groups like women, minorities, or older workers. And companies will often work closely with attorneys and conduct a disparate impact analysis before making any decisions and having any conversations. They're not doing this just because, hey, we just want to make sure, we're doing the right thing. They're doing it because they don't want you to sue their butt. Let's be real about it. Okay. So once we've gone through all of that, then sometimes there is a WARN Act analysis. So the WARN Act is the Worker Adjustment Retraining Notification Act. It is a federal law that requires companies with 100 or more employees to give employees at least 60 calendar days written notice of any kind of mass layoff or plant closing. And the whole purpose of it is because when you have that many people, you want them to have as much advance notice as possible to look for other work and retraining. So this 60-day notice not only requires that we notify the employees, but you also have to file it with the state. So that's why companies will do everything they can to avoid triggering WARN. We will often time out the notifications and the layoffs so that you don't hit that 50-person threshold. We will sometimes carve out segments of work or departments to make sure that we don't hit that threshold, because once you hit that threshold that you have to inform the state and give 60 days notice, it becomes a whole different ballgame. Now, this is a thing to note. Temporary employees are not entitled to WARN. And also companies can sometimes get an exception for the WARN notice for unforeseeable business circumstances. And unfortunately, it's a huge gray area that typically favors the employer. So once we've gone through all that and we've gotten the green light from, a legal standpoint, compliance standpoint, then we start getting down to the nitty gritty of the logistics. We are working with the managers to, we have the employees that have been approved. We will come up with a timeline and a sequence of communications. I know sometimes when we are affecting or notifying an entire department or plant, like I've said, we'll have a town hall, right? And notify everybody at one time. If it's only a select number of individuals, part of a larger department or whatever, we'll just meet with those individuals and then we'll make sure that we're going to pull the whole department together to let them know what's going on. So there's a lot of coordination that's taking place, not only on the communication side, but even on the security side and IT side. Sometimes we have to cut off systems as soon as a notification takes place. We have to make sure that security is on standby in case there are any volatile reactions. You can't leave any stone unturned. We are providing talking points to the managers on what they should say, have to say, and what they can't say. And we tell them, stick to the script, stick to the script, don't deviate from the script. And there's a reason for that, right? Now, mind you, managers hate this process. I don't know of any manager that's like, okay, that's fine, because managers have worked with employees for a long period of time in some situations, or maybe they just hired you 6 months ago and talked about, your future and your potential, and now they're having to let you go. It is gut wrenching. And, it's something they're being forced to do. And I've had many managers that have gone to the mat for their employees to no avail, because the expectation is what it is, and they can't save them, but they can't tell you that. So once we are closer to the notification point, then we are getting all the documentation together. We're going over everything again with the managers to make sure they understand their role. HR understands their role. So again, this is about the communication, what they say, how they say it, demonstrating empathy, and the legal and compliance guidance. And sometimes we're having to role play, actually what they're going to be saying to you. So let's talk about, pause right there, and let's talk about mass layoffs versus individual terminations. There's a huge difference in terms of how these are executed. And mass layoffs is typically based on numbers. It's around numbers. So they need to cut X number of positions to get to Y numbers of, Y number of savings. Individual layoffs are more personal. Maybe it's just your role, or, a few roles that are being eliminated due to restructuring, or your department is being outsourced. But the warning signs are different. The timeline is different. And frankly, your options are different as well. So in the first episode, I talked about my first layoff where, if you'll recall, I was working for a pharmaceutical company up in New Jersey. They had come out with this blockbuster drug that was expected to bring in almost $1 billion in revenue. And unfortunately, that blockbuster drug, about a year after it went to market, it was found to cause heart attacks in people who were taking it, and they had to pull it. That's $1 billion of expected revenue gone. A company has to account for that. So again, the president at the time was very transparent that we were going to have to reduce headcount to be able to account for that. So we knew that these layoffs were taking place, and I was part of the collateral damage of that. The second time, I had a job in a financial services firm, and this was in, I think, 2007, 2008. Now, if you'll recall, that was a time during I think they called it the Great Depression. That was the last big recession that we had. We had the collapse of the housing market as well as the financial market. If you recall that time, there were a number of banks taking the government bailout. The government had offered these bailouts to banks. The firm that I was working with had opted not to take the government bailout. And so I saw it as a good thing, particularly because I was in a brand new sales office, again, revenue generating for ETFs, which was, one of the hot things on the market then, financial, tools at the time. And we were hiring staff. So I'm like, hey, I'm in this office, brand new office of about 60 people. I'm the only HR person. Our headquarters was in San Francisco. And I was like, I didn't have anything to worry about. So I remember, however, I was on an HR call, and I can't remember the discussion, but I remember me thinking specifically, somebody had asked a question. I remember the head of HR said, we're not going to talk about that. I don't want to be insensitive to people who may be impacted or something. She said, she put a stop to the conversation, specifically said she didn't want to be insensitive. And I was like, insensitive about what? Okay, well, evidently that's something going on out there that doesn't have anything to do with me here. About 3 weeks later, We had a big meeting in our office, several big wigs coming in for a few days for a meeting. And so I dressed into my suit, and mind you, my office was 10 minutes down the street from where I lived in Jersey City, a 10-minute walk, dream job, right? So I get there a little bit early. I'm dressed in my suit, ready to meet the big wigs or whatever. And I'm making my rounds, speaking to everybody. And I stop by the site lead's office and I'm like, "Hey, Jim, how you doing?" He's like, "Hey, have you talked to Jay?" I'm like, "No." Now, mind you, Jay was in San Francisco. It's like 8:45 in the morning. So why would he be looking for me at 5:45 in the morning his time? So he was like, "Oh, well, I think he's looking for you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So as I'm walking back to my office, I hear the phone ring. So I run in. I'm like, "Hi, this is Latanya." It was Jay. "Hey, Latanya, how are you?" I said, "Fine." He said, "Are you in your office?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, hold on. Let me close the door." I put the phone down. And as soon as I turned to close the door, I was like, he's getting ready to let me go. I closed the door. I came back. I said, "Jay, if you're calling me this early, it can't be good news." And he said, "No, I'm sorry, it isn't. Yada, 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 yada." And I'm like, "Okay." I said, "When is my last day?" "Today." "What?" "Yes, Jim is going to meet with you on next steps, so on and so forth. HR is going to contact you about so on and so forth." And I was like, "Okay." Click, he's gone. 5-minute conversation. I turn to get on my computer, locked out. Now, that's one thing about financial firms, they don't be playing around. As soon as they notify you, they cutting your stuff off, and more than likely they're going to be escorting you out the door. But again, it's all about protocol and policy and to be able to protect their assets. So don't take it personally. That's just standard protocol. But I had never been treated like that before. I mean, in my last job, they had given me like a month's working notice, right? Here, they was like, "No, you up out of here." Jim came to my office, and I remember he asked me, he said, "Well, we got to notify the site. We got to, we're going to pull them together and let them know. Do you want to stay here for that?" I was like, "Hell no." I was like, "What do I want to stay here for that for?" And so I got the couple of things I could out of the office. I didn't have a lot of personal effects. I just had a couple of, things, my management books and stuff that I've been using for some projects. And I put a lot of other things I had worked on in the banker's box they had brought to me for them to ship to my house. And I walked home. And to this truth, I always think about it. I don't remember walking home. I don't remember. All I remember was next thing I know, I'm sitting in my living room looking at a blank TV, and I sat there for like 20 minutes trying to figure out what in the world just happened. What just happened? So again, that was where I didn't pay attention to the warning signs. So let's talk about those warning signs. Now, first of all, let me just say this. Some of you are going to recognize these signs and you may panic. Other people are going to say, "Well, look, that's just normal course of business for my company." And that may be true. The key is to look for patterns and changes from normal behavior. So now I'm going to give you the 4 categories of warning signs to watch out for. And I've mentioned this before, and it's probably the easiest one to identify is the financial red flags. And those tend to be the most reliable. So if you notice that your company has frozen budgets, their stock performance is declining, they are decreasing their revenue forecast, or they're missing it, especially if you hear about offers going out and then being rescinded, those are huge red flags. Other things to look out for: hiring fee freezes, especially sudden ones with no clear end date, delayed vendor payments. Maybe you're not close enough to see that, but if you hear of where vendors and contractors are not getting paid, then there, it may be an issue with cash flow problem, which could be indicative, of other challenges, cancel projects that were previously deemed as being priorities. And sometimes a company will start cutting down on the employee perks and stuff like free coffee or maybe the annual family picnic. So pay attention to those things. At least with publicly traded companies, it's public information. And most companies will have an earnings call. And I know in the company that I worked for, the president and senior leadership will often give a debrief to employees about the earnings call and what they have told Wall Street. I know a lot of people don't listen to that because they're like, look, all I want to do is come in and work my 8 hours and be done. You can't afford to do that in these days, right? Get your head out of the sand. If nothing else, I know because before I was following my company, I still am because, Google is nosy. When you start looking for stuff, it starts feeding it to you. So I'm still able to keep track of it. But you can easily look up and see to get a sense on how your company is performing. Now, if you're working for a private company, it may be a little bit more difficult to get information, but you can still get it, right? You just got to, be a little bit more diligent about it. But see what the financial forecast is saying, because that could be a huge indicator. The second thing I will look out for are behavioral changes in leadership. So if you suddenly see an uptick of senior people leaving, or you look up one day and the person is there, and the next day, you see that was that location unknown or whatever, an outlook, then that may also be a red flag. If you notice your manager's behavior changes, if your manager is typically on top of things, meeting with you on a regular basis and upbeat, but then all of a sudden they seem kind of stressed and distracted, or if they're unavailable a lot more because they're in these meetings that you know nothing about, that could be a sign. If you are now being excluded from meetings, let's say you had a recurring meeting on your calendar and all of a sudden you don't see it. Isn't that the worst? Because in Outlook in particular, if you want to revise a meeting notice and omit certain people, it doesn't notify the person that's being omitted. It's just, the meeting just falls off their calendar. You're like, well, darn, what happened? Or maybe, you are falling off an email chain that you were part of. Those are things that you need to be aware of. Okay. The third category, I would say, are industry and competition signs. So when you see your competitors in the market or the industry even changing, that could also be indicative of changes for your own organization. So don't ignore what's happening in your industry. So if you see some of your major competitors also announcing layoffs, if the industry publications are discussing downturns and challenges, if there are technology disruptions that are affecting your sector. And technology disruptors, let's talk about that for a minute. What are technology disruptors? We're seeing it everywhere, and it's mainly around IoT, the Internet of Things. AI is a big one. So, for example, let's say in retail, that's a great one. In like grocery stores, you now have cashiers that are being replaced by the registers, the self-checkout registers. That is a technology disruptor. Let's say you now have shops under like Shopify that is replacing your brick and mortar. That is a disruptor. You now have these, virtual legal services, like I think it's called LegalZoom, that is now replacing maybe a lawyer in an office. That is a technology disruptor. So how is technology disrupting or affecting your sector? Now, there are different telltale signs for different industries. So right now we're seeing a lot going on in the tech industry, right? I mean, just 3 years ago, technology was having a boom, but it has significantly slowed down. And we've seen a number of these tech companies now having these massive layoffs. So when you see tech companies canceling product launches, reducing their R&D spending, consolidating development teams, then it's definitely something to look out for. Retail has completely changed. We see store closing. What was the latest store closing? Big Lots, we saw the Big Lot stores closing. We now see where some grocery stores are being bought up by other grocery stores and closing. So again, if you're working in any of those areas, it's something to look out for. Now, the fourth category is what we're calling the workload paradox. Now, this one tends to confuse people because if you see a significant drop in your workload or your team's workload, it could be a sign that layoffs are coming. However, you can also see an uptick in your work, right? Where the workload is increasing because in addition to your regular workload, they're now asking you to document all of your processes and or train other people. So that's also something to look out for. So watch out for sudden requests to document everything that you're doing, cross training colleagues on your responsibilities. Your work is being redistributed and without really an explanation, and projects are being assigned to other teams and departments. Now, it's funny because people are pretty keen, and when those things start going on in a department, people start asking questions. So I think, again, no reason to get alarmed, but a reason to maybe accelerate your exit plan. Now, the fifth one I'm going to mention because I think, unfortunately, oftentimes has more credibility than not, and that is the rumor mill. Office gossip, for the most part, we try to dissuade people from getting caught up in it because it can be very destructive and distractive. But I will say it is still important to keep your ears to the ground and pay close attention because oftentimes, there's some truth to that. If you are working from home, especially if you're working from home right now 5 days a week, um, you're fortunate in that, okay, you've been able to do that and you have a good work-life balance. But on the flip side of that, you're no longer a part of those water cooler conversations, which is sometimes where you can get your best information. And it's a little bit harder to connect with people to find out, hey, what's the water cooler talk? So that's why it's important to get out of your silo, have those connections, have those, confidants you can speak to get information, get a pulse of what is going on. But again, if you're hearing things, don't panic. Just use as motivation to do a little bit more digging and do more research and prepare. Okay. Now, the things I don't want you to worry about are your performance reviews. Let's say, for example, your manager seems to be a little bit more picky, so to speak, with your performance review. They're dinging you on things they didn't. Normally, that's not a sign. It's just the normal evaluation process where maybe that manager has gotten coaching on how they are doing their evaluations. So again, nothing necessarily to be, concerned about. Another thing not to be concerned about are routine organizational changes because every company reorganizes periodically. Another thing not to worry about are temporary project delays, because those also happen. But if you start seeing it as a pattern, then maybe it's just something to kind of keep your eye on. And then one-off budget cuts. Again, companies cut costs all the time. So if these are just one-offs periodically, nothing to worry about. But if you're seeing a recurring pattern, something pay attention. Again, one sign doesn't mean anything. Multiple signs happening simultaneously, time to pay attention. So, what do you do when you see the signs? It's time to activate that F48 framework. You want to do it proactively. Remember, one is focus, where you're going to start updating your resume, gathering the stuff we talked about, your work samples and your achievements and those kudos, putting them in a brag book or put them in your, like I call a flex file, getting those things. Because again, like me, when they notified me and turned off my computer, I wasn't able to get in and get those things. You want to focus on then the facts, research your company's financial situation, update or understand your benefits, review your employment contract if you have one so that you can understand, hey, what is the situation once you're notified? And then finally is the foundation. That's the third F. Strengthen your network, improve your LinkedIn profile, kind of start, reaching out, having some casual conversations with people about opportunities just so you can be prepared. Again, not panicking, but preparing. So if the layoff news comes, you're like, okay, cool. I was already getting my stuff together anyway. So let me tell you about a time that I was aware. So remember, I told you the second one, I was completely caught off guard. And I said to myself, I will never, ever, ever get caught off guard again. They caught me asleep at the wheel. I didn't pay attention to my gut. It won't happen again. My next job was in New York City at a music company in Rockefeller Plaza. Now this was during the time where the music industry had just plummeted. People had stopped purchasing music CDs. You had Napster that was offering the free streaming. iTunes had, recently allowed you to start purchasing single songs versus an entire album. So shortly after I had joined the organization, we're seeing all these things, and the music industry is taking a hit, taking a hit, taking a hit. And to the point where one year, I can't remember the exact year, but their revenue had been cut in half, right? So, as I talked about before, we start planning 3-4 months out. And so HR is working with these departments, the overhead departments, right? Um, Facilities, finance, legal, those kind of, departments, to work with them to identify heads to cut. So we have been going through all that. And I'm looking around like, you know what? HR is going to be next. And I'm like, I've been here before. I see the signs. So you know what I started doing? I started taking my stuff home. I had albums, I had kind of decorated my office and I had all these albums up, and I started taking them home. And I remember when my coworkers came in and he was like, what happened to your stuff? And I was like, oh, I took them home. I'm getting them framed. I ain't telling them jokers would not be seeing these walls again because that'd be less stuff I have to carry out whenever I leave. I had a coworker of mine. She used to always tell me, Tanya, carry light, because if they come and tell me, all I'm gonna have to do is get my purse and head out the door. So I always remember that, right? So I pretty much took home all of my personal effects. And I'm really paying attention. I'm really paying attention. Well, they started giving me other projects. And one project they put me on was the implementation of Taleo, which is like a recruiting system, a hiring system, which was a big deal. And so I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong about this, because why would they be putting me on this project and they're getting ready to eliminate my position? So that kind of threw me off. But again, I knew I was the most recent person hired. I didn't have a large client group because I was in a COE role. I was the learning and development specialist. I had a very small client group that could easily be assigned to someone else. So I was like, I'm ripe for being let go. So another month or two went on, and I was like, well, maybe I was wrong about the signs I was seeing, right? And I'll never forget, I was in our recruiter's office, and she's Jamaican, PG. And she told me, she said, you know what, Latanya? She said, something's going on. She said, I just didn't sleep well last night. I said, really? She said, yeah. She said, I just feel like, something's going on. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm walking back to my office, and then I see my manager and the compensation lead walking behind me with the blue folders of death, as I like to call them. And I'm walking, good morning. They're like, good morning. They're still walking behind me. I was like, y'all come to see me? They said, yes. So I said, okay. I walked in. Y'all here to lay me off? You would have thought I asked them what color Fruit of Looms they had on. But I was like, hey, I've been waiting. What we got? So that was because I was paying attention to the signs. And really, that is what allowed me to kind of structure and formulate the F48 so that you could know these signs and kind of know what to do. and you're not stuck there, blah, 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 once they notify you. I was ready. I had my questions together and everything. So I was like, okay, just, all I need to know is what's my last day in here. That's all I really need to know. Right. So now let's talk about the actual layoff conversation and what really happens in that conference room and what your manager and HR can and cannot say and the scripts that companies actually use. So before the meeting takes place, and so now because we have so many people working from home, a lot of these are taking place, across video, or sometimes they are taking place face to face, but we make sure the morning of we have everything together, everything is coordinated, double checking with IT and security, and not knowing how an employee is going to respond. It's just a very stressful time for anybody that's involved in the planning. So again, I talked about the script that we give to your manager for them to use, and we tell them what I say: do not deviate from the script. Do not deviate from the script. So in the meeting, you typically only have maybe two people, maybe three sometimes, but most often it's going to be your manager and HR and the impacted employee. Depending on the situation, we may have security on standby, but for the ones I've managed, we don't want them in the room, right? We don't want to make people feel like criminals, but we'll have them on standby because, again, it's a very emotionally charged situation. So, leading up to it, and again, talking and working with so many managers on these actions, to me, that I can count, they're probably thinking, one, they wish they could have warned you. They're thinking that you really don't deserve this. You've been a great employee. You've been a loyal employee. You've been a hardworking employee. They're hoping that you don't ask them specific questions that they can't answer. They're hoping that it goes very quickly. They hope that HR is going to jump in and do all the talking, and they just want to get out of there as fast as possible. And on the HR side, we're thinking, manager, just stick to the script and get off the daggone phone or get out the room. We just want them out the way. We tell managers, if you are talking more than 5 minutes, you've been talking too long. Okay. So the manager is the one that will inform you of the decision. And they'll say something like, well, LaTanya, I've called this meeting because unfortunately, I have to inform you that your position is being eliminated. They may give you more context to say something like, well, hey, as you're aware, as it was announced in late August, the division is having to adjust our operating costs in response to weakening demand. And as a result, a number of positions haven't been impacted, including yours. Now, notice the language that's being used there. They are saying your position is being eliminated, not that you're being fired. It's always the position, people. It's always a position. It doesn't have anything to do with you personally. And the reason why we say that is because it is legally safer for the company. Now, when they say that, sometimes we'll go on to say the decision is final and not open to discussion. So what that really means is that, look, we've already decided and we really don't want to have this debate. We don't want to have this debate. We just want you to just say yes, thank you, and just move on. We don't want to have this debate, right? That's the reason why they say that, just to eliminate that as being an option, because unfortunately it isn't debatable. Oftentimes people ask, well, is this my performance? And they say, no, it's not a reflection of your performance. But what they really mean is that we don't want you to sue us for wrongful termination, right? When they say that, this is due to business restructuring, it means that, hey, we need to cut costs and your salary and benefits was one of them. So unfortunately, you got to go. And then another one, when they say, hey, we're happy to provide a reference, what they really mean is that, hey, if somebody calls us up, we're just going to tell them what your position was and how long you worked for us. They can't really give you any more than that, right? So that's really the meaning behind a lot of the layoff speak that I'll say, that they give. Now, your manager is legally not allowed to discuss these 5 things. One, who else is being laid off, why you were specifically chosen, whether more layoffs are coming, details about the company's financial situation, and whether your position might be coming back. And they shouldn't be telling you, who else was chosen and why they weren't chosen, right? They're trained to deflect those questions as well as HR. Now, again, their role is just to inform you of the decision, and then we want them up out of there. From there, they'll often turn it over to HR to give you the logistics of things. And this is like your last day of work, your severance package details, if there are any, information on your health benefits, return of company property, your reference policy, all of that. And more than likely, they're going to be your point of contact after you leave. So, for the most part, the meetings will last 20 minutes. Again, we tell managers if you are in there more than 5 minutes, then you have failed miserably because you need to be out of there in 5 minutes, because the goal is not to drag this process out. It's really just to give the information that the employee needs so that they are comfortable, and hopefully it will, parlay into an effective transition. So again, it's really not a discussion. It's really just going over the logistics. So again, I kind of referenced the different types of layoffs. Again, there's different types of layoff conversations as well. Again, the mass layoff conversation is usually more formal. It's often done in a group. And then you'll have the individual meetings, and it's a lot of corporate speak, right? Being politically correct, corporate. Those I would probably say are the most difficult. The individual position, you know what? I take that back. It's probably the individual conversations, because you can't help but ask a wonder, why me? Like, why didn't Mary Jo get laid off? We doing the same thing. Oh, is it because I wasn't a good employee? Is it because I was out on maternity leave? Is it because, I had to call out sick because you're asking all these things about why is me? Now, in those meetings, your manager may be a little bit more personal, and they may express genuine regret. And they even provide a little bit more explanation in terms of why your specific role was impacted. When it's at the department, those are pretty much matter of fact. Usually, again, we'll pull the whole department together to let them know. So it's very, similar to a mass layoff. And then your performance-based layoff is really what we call for cause, where it really is about your performance. So in those situations, we also have to be very, very careful about the language. And we will go back and reference, well, you remember when we had a conversation about this, or you remember where, you provided coaching on this, or sometimes you were put on a performance improvement plan and you didn't meet the expectations and those kinds of things. That's also considered a layoff of sorts. So when you are in those meetings, there are certain things that you should say and shouldn't say. One thing that you might be surprised about is thanking them for letting you know. Yes, thanking them, because again, how you leave is how people are going to remember you, and may also, allow you to go back to the organization. It's funny because I read a statistic not too long ago where you have so many people going back to their companies. And I think it's because, one, people are realizing that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. It's also probably part of, hey, the devil you know is better than than the one you don't. But there are so many people going back to where they came from. So you want to leave in good graces. You want to be seen as being respectful. So again, by thanking them, it's like, oh, okay. Because mind you, especially in HR, we are extremely grateful for the people who make our jobs easier and not more difficult, and the ones who are very respectful in the conversation, that kind of thing. I've seen some situations where people are calling you everything but a child of God, cursing, raising their voice, pointing their finger. I mean, I've seen some pretty horrible situations. And again, you want to give people a pass because you understand how difficult it is. I mean, you understand, right? And people really don't mean it in the moment, but nonetheless, it still doesn't feel good, right? So, as much as you can, be courteous, be respectful. It definitely goes a long way. I would ask, when would you receive the written details, who you can contact for questions, and what is the timeline for returning the company equipment. Do not say, hey, this isn't fair. Don't say, well, why not that person and this person? Don't say, I'm going to sue. We hear that all the time. Okay. And don't say the company is making a mistake. Remember, this isn't the time to negotiate. You can do that later on. Just go ahead and get all the information that you need, go home, go through everything, and then ask for a follow up meeting when you've had a time to go through everything, get your thoughts and your questions and your evidence together, and you can have a well thought out conversation where people will actually hear you. You can do that. Just because that's your last day potentially on the job doesn't mean that the door is closed where you won't have an opportunity to ask questions or state your case, so to speak. Okay. So if you are in a building, security may be around to monitor you collecting your things and heading out the building. Sometimes I've been in situations where we will allow people to just head home and we will pack their things and send their things home to them. Some people prefer to get their own things, which is understandable. But again, you're being watched by security, you're being escorted out to the parking lot, and it doesn't feel good. But again, it's not personal, it's just security, protocol. And even though it feels like we're treating you like a criminal, that's not the intent. Most of the times, we're just following company policy that is designed to protect the intellectual property and systems access. I have been in some situations where, despite security being on site, people trash the office, they're throwing stuff, they're making threats. It it's just so uncalled for, right? But again, I get it. I don't excuse it, but I do get it. But that's all the more reason why we can't take any chances, and why security is often on hand and around and visible when these situations take place. So again, if you're seeing any of these red flags, you'll want to start implementing the F48 strategies now. You can still get the free checklist, which you can do by sending a request on my social media, sending an email to exit to excel at gmail.com. Put exit to excel checklist in the subject line, and we'll send that to you. But again, it's about focusing on getting your professional materials and documenting your achievements, gathering facts about your company's financial situation and your employment terms, and then building the foundation, starting those outreaches, getting your LinkedIn profile together, kind of seeing what's out there, so that you have already kind of started your job search, kind of like a soft launch, right? So again, the goal is to be prepared, not paranoid. And the more prepared you are, when you do have your manager or somebody coming to you with the blue folder of death, you're like, okay, like me, it's like, okay, what you got? Let's get with it, right? Because I've been seeing this coming. So I want to talk about another question that I received that kind of fits in with everything we talked about, where someone said that their manager had come to them asking them to document all of their processes. And so what should they do, and should they be worried? So the thing is, this could go either way, because sometimes, we'll want to take a look at a process to see if there's an opportunity to optimize or make it more efficient or take out waste, right? That's what Six Sigma is all about. So it may not necessarily be about eliminating your position. It could just be where, hey, this is about a process improvement exercise. But then again, keep in mind, it could also be a sign of a potential job elimination. So again, pay attention to the context. Is it just happening with you, or is it your entire department? Are there other signs? What are the company's finances, looking like? You wanted to look at everything in totality and determine, hey, is this something that I need to be like maybe preparing for an exit, or is it just a normal course of business? But thank you. I think that was Jennifer who had posed that question. Um, Someone also asked about when your company hires these consulting firms. I think McKinsey is one of the big ones, and they were brought in to optimize operations. And what does that mean? To me, that is usually a big flag because these management companies are not cheap. And it often means that a company is looking for ways to cut costs, and labor is usually the biggest cost there is. So again, you'll want to take a look at it in context to say, okay, again, what are the finances looking like? How has my manager's behavior been? Are there other actions taking place across the company? Depending on the picture in total will determine how aggressively you might want to start getting your ducks in a row and executing that F48 plan. So keep your questions coming. Even things are not related to this. I love reading about it. You'll see sometimes I am responding with a video message. I'm just now learning. I actually just did a video response last week, but I didn't know I couldn't move the question was covering up my face. So I'm still playing around with it, but I like that because a lot of times if you have a question, other people have the same question. So it's a good idea to kind of, generate a conversation around the things that people have, top of mind. So again, you can ask a question, use the hashtag AskLT on my social media on Instagram or TikTok. If you want to remain anonymous or if it's a little sensitive in nature, then send me a DM. And you can also, again, use my email at exit2excel@gmail.com. So next week, so I know we've talked a lot about the layoff process, what happens during, we've talked about what happens before, leading up to that. So I'm really ready to get into, because I know so many people are interested in the whole job search process, right? So next week, we're going to dive into what does that job search launch plan look like? Most people think it's about getting a good resume together and applying for jobs. That's not a plan. That's not a strategy either. So we're going to talk about a full strategy that's going to take you from, hey, I don't even know what to do or even where to start, to having a well thought out plan that actually works, outlines a realistic timeline, and how to set goals that will keep you motivated instead of overwhelmed. And I'll also share why most people sabotage their job search in the first week or so by focusing on the wrong things at the wrong time. Okay, so we're going to talk about all of that. And I can't wait for it. But it's going to be a long series. Like I said, we're here every week. We're here every week. So we're going to break these things down, and we're going to break them down to where you're going to clearly understand what is what. And as you know, every week you're going to have homework and to-dos, and we're going to keep the conversation going on our social media. So again, TikTok, Exit to Excel, Instagram, Exit to Excel, Facebook, Exit to Excel. Check us out there. I'm also leaving other, reels and posts about other things that are coming up to give you some little tidbits. So be sure to check us out on those mediums. So, what are this week's homework steps? One is audit your current situation. Are you seeing any of the signs that we discussed today? If you are, I would love to hear about it, right? So, again, you can either comment on my social media or send me a DM. Would love to hear about the signs you may be seeing. Second, update your F48 preparedness. Even if you're not like facing an immediate layoff, having your things together will definitely give you more confidence and make you feel more comfortable right now. And then thirdly, strengthen your professional relationships. It's focus on one to strengthen this week or renew this week. I can't wait to talk about networking. I mean, networking, I think, is one of the most impactful yet the least used tool that people utilize in their job search. People feel like, well, it's very transactional. I'm only going to reach out to this person if they can do something for me. It's not really about this. It's about building and maintaining relationships. And you really don't want to just reach out to people when you need something. So if there's a person you've worked with and you haven't touched base with them in a while, just send them a quick note. It doesn't take a whole lot. Just say, hey, just, reaching out, I thought about you, what you've been up to, would love to catch up or whatever. And, it's just as simple as that. So think about, a person you can reach out to this week and sending them a thoughtful message. And then fourthly, if you know a person who is in the process now, they've been impacted by a layoff, reach out to them to say hello, reach out to them to offer any kind of assistance, even if it's just to take them out for a cup of coffee. I'm telling you right now, it will mean the world to them, because once you've been told, thank you, but your services are no longer needed. I mentioned this last week. It's almost like you're contagious. And if other people associate with you, they're going to get laid off too. It's a very lonely place. So reach out to that one person that you know of that may be currently in a process. So remember, knowledge is power and preparation is protection. The goal of all of this, guys, is not to live in fear. It is to live with awareness and readiness. I have successfully navigated through all of my transitions. You can too. If you go back and look, you have already probably survived a number of transitions that you weren't even conscious of. You're stronger and more resilient than you even realize. So I thank you for trusting me with your time and your career questions. I'm Latanya, aka LT. I'm looking forward to seeing you next Friday with another episode of Exit to Excel. Again, remember, go to my social media, Instagram, TikTok, follow, like, share, subscribe. We're working on a lot of great content to bring you to hopefully be able to parlay a lot of these layoffs into layups, from exiting to excellence. So until then, keep your eyes open, your network strong, your confidence high. You've got this. I'll see you next week, and I'll see you during the week on our social media. Take care.